Take two.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Monarch Family Chiropractic's Tuesday night spinal workshop. I'm Dr. Kristen, and Happy New Year. Welcome to January 2024. We are going to kick this month off with some of our functional movements talking about strong back. And in doing so, there's a tons of different ways that we show you throughout your care and throughout your journey in strengthening your structure and your nervous system on the back. And yet we're going to go into just talking more tonight about your core. And because the reason is that your core is really what creates a strong back, and so a strong lower back anyway. So when we talk in other workshops and we go through functional movements with neck and having a strong upper back, and all that has to do with stabilizing us and supporting our nervous system and our structure, we'll go into different movements that would be related to that part of the spine. At the same point, your core is sort of your base. And so if we have a weak core, it is really hard to change posture. It's really hard to change the strength of any part of our back, upper or lower. And so if you're working on your curves, if you're knowing that your posture is forward or your posture is pulling too far back, or your curves aren't intact structurally in your spine, then we know that really we need to go down to the basics of where everything meets up at our core. And if we can start centering off our foundation and our core, that will strengthen our back in all kinds of ways and allow the postural changes that have to happen up top to happen much easier. It is really hard to make any correction here if this bottom half isn't in a neutral position. Your body's going to constantly compensate either forward or back or left or right. So when we look at our core, I want to just go through some basics, and hopefully for some of you, these may be ones you've already done or seen before, or maybe have done before through chiropractic or through physical therapy or through occupational therapy, or some movements through Pilates, or some movements that seem similar that are done with, even through a personal trainer or someone who's helping support you in your positioning and training and positioning and doing motions. If your core is in proper position, then you can really lift properly and strengthen properly, whether that's bands or doing a reformer in Pilates or doing weights, as big as doing something squats or assisted or with a bar or on your own. So all of those motions really depend on the strength from the center area. So the basics that I think get overlooked sometimes by using bigger muscles is that we really want to have the front of our core, our pelvic floor, and the smaller abdominal and pelvic muscles to be the ones engaging. And so I want to teach you a couple different motions and probably have some similar names and terms that you may have heard of before, whether you've experienced how to use them or not, we'll see. And that way, hopefully we can take you through some beginning stages of what to try and make sure that you're able to do these motions properly before you go on to adding more motions in a gym or with weights or with bands, or even possibly with a reformer in training that way for your core. So I always like to talk about muscle groups as well before we go into the few of the exercises and the movements, because it's sometimes easier to figure out where you have a weakness or where your muscles aren't engaging as much, and other ones that are over engaging by what is tight versus what's not. So when our core itself, and I'll talk about the transverse abdominis, that's a muscle that's below your belly button and runs this way. That's a muscle that is more about how our core is stabilized and our low back is than it is the muscles of our stomach that we think about here. So a six-pack isn't really that valuable if the muscles underneath it or below it aren't functioning the way they should. So this isn't about doing crunches or trying to do a motion for the muscles up here. It's doing the muscles more in our lower abdominal area. So like I said, right below our belly button. And when that muscle's either not engaging or weak, then what we tend to see is tight glutes or disengaged glutes and tight hamstrings. So if you feel like your hamstrings are always tight, Or if you also feel like your hip flexors, so when we talk about that psoas muscle, the muscle that allows you to bend your hips like this, that has a lot to do with your low back and has a lot to do with the stability and the mobility of it. So if sitting a lot is part of your day, and when you go to stand up, it's hard to stand up straight, or you feel like you have low back pain, then a lot of times we need to stretch that front of our core and that front of our hip muscle. If that's always tight, that goes along with having a tight hamstring. Because what it does is tip you forward. So that forward tilt is creating a weak abdominal, tight hip flexors, tight hamstrings, and also then a tight low back usually, or a very sore and overactive low back. So in order to get us into neutral, we have to stretch this, we have to stretch these, and we have to more engage our glute muscles, so right up here, as well as those front of the abdominals below the belly button. So if we can engage more here and here, you'll be less tight here and here. And that helps keep you out of an anterior tilt when you're tipping this way and get you more into a neutral tilt here, where the knees are soft, the knees are over the hips are over the shoulders, and I'm engaging from here versus engaging kind of from here in my low back. So in that posture, we want to make sure that we're in a neutral position, engaging this muscle in our lower abdominal in order to work towards a stronger back from the front muscles that don't get enough work, and using less of these erector muscles along our low back that we overuse, and overuse sometimes our glutes and overuse our hamstrings to compensate for trying to have strength here in our core. So the first movement or muscle I want you to understand how to feel is that transverse abdominis. So if you are in what most people understand, or I've heard the word Kegel before, to do a Kegel movement or exercise is to tighten this muscle. And the best way it's usually described on how to tighten that muscle is by engaging your lower abdominal area and your core, almost as if you're cutting off the flow of going to the bathroom. So what that feels like to be peeing and then midstream stop. And that's, I think, the easiest way to describe how you're tightening that muscle here, because it really is in your lower abdomen and more in your pelvic region than it actually is up in here. So when you can do that Kegel and you can engage that muscle here, and I always put my hands there so I can feel it. And when we get down on the floor, that's what you'll see me do. And if we want to all practice, for those of us in here, I'm down for doing that so that you can feel what it's like to engage that muscle. And then we go through some very small movements to make sure that we're actually using those muscles first before we add in weights, before we add in movements, before we add in maybe more of a functional exercise that could be bypassing us really using our core properly so that we can gain that stronger back and gain that stronger stability. So when we're using this muscle, it should feel like our lower abdomen is tight and our low back and our hips are not. And it's easy to tighten this and also feel like you're almost tightening your glutes. And so we want to you want to engage glutes, but in a different way. So I always like to say, think about when you're tightening here and that you're not tightening here while you're doing that. Because it's easy sometimes to just try to squeeze your whole center, your whole core. And we have to separate that a little bit because we tend to over engage the low back and use those muscles too much. So when we start from the floor, you're going to see me we're just going to talk through how to engage this and how to do very simple movements while it's engaged. And I know this may seem really basic, and too many people don't even know what this muscle feels like to tighten it and to hold it while you're doing a movement. Meaning, I don't want someone to go do exercises in a gym or with weights or with even bands if they don't know how to tighten this, and then they could easily not get the results they want or injure themselves because they're using more of your fat. You're using more of the big muscles, right? Your legs, your back, your glutes, even some of these ab muscles here.
And that doesn't really give us the strong core we need or build that stability for the other part of our spine and the rest of our posture, if you will. So when we're doing this exercise, I always like to make sure that you can engage that muscle, hold that engagement for like 10 seconds at a time. And most people, when they learn how to use this muscle and what it feels like to use this muscle, they hold their breath when they tighten that muscle because we're just not used to using it. So when I get onto the floor here, the movement is going to be that I can talk through a count of 3 or 5 or 10 while I'm holding it, so that I'm not holding my breath and counting in my head while I'm tightening it, and making sure that you're actually breathing through the engagement. Because our engagement, our tendency when I teach this is to people just kind of tighten and then they hold their breath at the same time. So I just have them count out loud so that you make sure you're breathing and that you're making this, your breath motion happen, because you've got to be breathing obviously while you're working out or doing a motion. So before we take it to a functional movement, we need to make sure we know how to engage it, and we need to make sure we're doing a couple different exercises with it engaged before we go to an exercise of function, like doing a movement standing up and walking, doing a movement with weights, doing a movement with squats, doing any kind of movement with our core or with any type of resistance outside our body weight. So when I get to the floor, the motion that I started is just on the floor and just on my back, so that this muscle is engaged and I'm breathing at the same time it's engaged. So some people learn bridging first, where you're just engaging that muscle and then you're lifting up the pelvis slightly and then bringing it back down. And you can certainly start in that motion of just engage and do a slow count up of 3. And the count up is easy when you're engaging. When you're coming back down, it's easy to just kind of want to let everything go. And you want to hold that engagement all the way till you get to the floor. So there's no letting go as you bring your body back down. So first, it's just being able to put your fingers below your belly button, feel that muscle engage, which you'll also kind of feel like tucking your belly button in towards the floor, tightening here, and staying engaged while you can count to 10. While you're breathing, while it's engaged. Then once you feel what that muscle feels like to tighten and to use it, then we start with moving the arms and the legs. So I always start with just 1, and then as long as you can keep it engaged through the whole movement, then you can move on to the next movement. So when we engage here, I'm going to bring my leg up to a 90 degrees. And again, when you come up, it's easy to be engaged. It's letting it down and this stay tight. Engaged, 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 engaged. So a count of 3 up and a count of 3 down. And each leg 1 at a time, coming up slow, and then bringing it back down, staying tight, staying tight, staying tight, staying tight. So it's doing legs individually, making sure you can hold that engagement, and then doing arms overhead. Same thing, engaged to here, the count of 3, and then it stays engaged as you come back down, which is harder to do. So I would do each leg and each arm separately, making sure this stays engaged the whole time. And low back is staying relaxed. My low back is not tight at all. I'm not engaged at all in my low back. And the more I'm neutral here by, I guess, showing you what not neutral is. This is not neutral, right? That's tilting forward. This is not neutral, tucking under. So I don't want my back flat on the floor. I want that nice natural curve of the low back to be in my low back still, but to be in neutral. So I still have some space here, but I'm not arching up and I'm not arching down. Sometimes you have to do both to almost feel what neutral is, I feel like. So now that I'm neutral and this is engaged, then the next step would be, and again, you want to be able to do a set of, say, 10 of them on each side before you would move on to the next movement, but it would be doing a crisscross pattern. So now once you're comfortable keeping that engaged, just with the legs and just with the arms, we would do 1 of each. So it's a crisscross pattern within our body. So we're gonna use right leg with left arm and then left leg with right arm. So arms overhead, I'm going out of that pelvic tilt back to neutral, engage, and then it's a count of 3 up. And a slow count back down, all while that is still firing. And then crisscrossing the other way, left leg with right arm. And a very slow intentional count down. And being able to do, 5 to 10 repetitions each side as a set of the exercise. And if you feel like you're tilting, tipping, or losing that engagement, you just stop and reset. It's kind of like when we teach you wall angels, and if midway through your wall angel, you don't feel like you're doing your motion in your shoulder blade right, and you're raising your shoulders, we just stop and restart over. Or that's as many as you do. If 3 is what you can do, and then after 3, you don't feel like you can hold that engagement anymore, then that's where we start. So we start laying down with moving that muscle without any other body parts, then opposite arm with opposite leg, bringing them together and then taking them away from each other. If that feels comfortable and you feel like you can hold that engagement through a set of 10 of them, then we're ready to go on to all fours. And so the next motion for strengthening the back is again now adding some body weight and some different movements with our core by being on our hands and knees. So the next set I would have someone do is from here. And same thing, we think about teaching and stretching in like the cat-cow. I don't want somebody here and I don't want somebody here. Neutral is here with a flat back. And, arms kind of shoulder width and right over my hands over my shoulders. And same thing with knees. So engaging here is a lot harder on all fours than it is laying down. So engaging here first, not with my low back, but with my belly. Then it's the same thing. Can you do this motion for a count of 3? And a slow count down. And then I'm still engaged, or re-engage if you need to. Switch arms. 3 count up. 3 count down. Then can you do that with the legs? And I like just kind of going in a motion like this. You could go leg straight. I just don't tend to. I tend to when I use both, I guess. So same thing. I'm out of not sagging or swaying, engage, and then slow count up, slow count down. Then the next motion is to crisscross, but from your hands and knees. So then engaged, can I keep a flat back, soft shoulders? And again, my neck stays neutral. I'm turning to look at you, but my head stays straight. My head's not here, my head's not here, right? Spine is neutral all the way from hopefully head to tailbone. And so then engaged and arm and leg. And engaged arm and leg, opposite. And so it's doing a full set of those before you move on to anything else. So I like having people start at the floor, see how they do with that crisscross pattern. Come onto the hands and knees and then do their second set if they get comfortable in that first set and they feel fine with the low back. Can they engage for 10 repetitions, crisscross on hands and knees in that cross pattern or that Superman pattern? And then the last motion I would show as far as this simple engagement of core to engage a strong and engage for a strong back would be, can they do, I forget what they call the motion, but it's basically a cross pattern where this is engaged again and the motion is here. And so you're engaging different muscles of your back, but all while using your core. So core has to be engaged before I then start incorporating all this other motion through here. Or then to do it functionally, once you feel like you understand how to engage that and you can do it laying and you can do it on all fours, then you're really going to think about doing it when you're sitting. And is that muscle engaged when I'm just sitting in my chair working at my computer? And is it engaged when I stand up to go walk to the bathroom or the water cooler? And just really getting used to engaging and supporting your low back from here versus from here or here. And so then it becomes a functional activity of strengthening. When you can engage that muscle, then any motion I do, that's where my motion starts from. So if I'm doing a lunge, or I'm doing a squat, or I'm doing even an upper body movement, it is, am I engaged here before I drop? Used to having something in my arms, drop into a lunge, right? So is my core centered before I'm going into any kind of a dip, or before I'm going into a functional movement of engaging, and can I balance on one? So anything you can add in with small movements like that, have you using the muscles correctly to start, so that then you can start, a crisscross pattern, say with a weight or a band, or something around your ankle if you were doing things for your legs. But if you're not engaging from your core, your low back may do way more work than it needs to. For the muscles that don't need extra work are usually our erectors here, and you're just engaging from the proper way, which is here and your glutes, and then the other small muscles are supporting. Bigger muscles are supporting, I guess I should say, those smaller movements. But we'll tend to really overuse our glutes or our hamstrings or our back if we're not starting from the front. So I wanted to just go through some very basics as what that feels like, what movements I do to make sure someone feels that muscle engaging, and then just give you simple things you can practice from your bed, your floor, your yoga mat, and making sure that you feel like you can do those motions, opposite arm, opposite leg, without any back engagement in the sense of flare up, or something feeling uncomfortable, or something feeling talkative that shouldn't, before we start adding in a movement with, say, weights or lunges, or more of a functional movement. So in strengthening, we got to think about what we do in our whole day to day. If we sit in a chair and we don't engage our core, but then we try to go to the gym or go to a class and do an hour-long class of an activity with muscles that we don't use in our day to day, we tend to then either plateau or not see results, or injure ourselves because we're not using the proper stability muscles first. We're just overpowering with the big ones. So hopefully that just gives you some tips on ways a strong back comes from your core. And I briefly touched on crisscross pattern. And when we do the one for the other part of the body, and we talk about that from the top side, we'll maybe go into that with more slides or more pictures and diagrams. But we really are there's a crisscross pattern within the body for here and for here. So why I had you do opposite hand, opposite arm is just that this goes with this goes with this. And I know we talk about that a lot when we find imbalances within your posture or within your structure when we're adjusting and evaluating you. It's the same with the head and neck. This goes with this front side goes with this back side. So think about an X through your body from front to back and left to right, because that is really how we create the stability of a strong back, a strong upper back, or a strong lower back, is by stabilizing that core and that center. And so we really have to work from front to back and left to right very intentionally to make sure we're not imbalanced, or we're not doing a movement improperly to where we're overusing a front to back or overusing a left to right, and working through where those patterns are different so that you can create a new pattern in a way that teaches your body to do those muscles, or use the right muscles and do those movements with intention, versus just sometimes we tend to do things fast and not really think about our posture in the movement, or lift something too heavy without really being engaged from our core first. So hopefully that avoids any injuries for people if they're working into movements and mobility now after they're getting out of pain and they're wanting to do more activities, is that we start from these core places of our upper back with those wall angels and different things we give you to do for your upper back, and then for your lower back, so that you're doing a movement from the right place to start. And then as you add movements, add weight, add activities, you find that your body's doing them in a more functional, supported way. So please message us or I guess check in with us with questions
We may have had some technical difficulties getting onto the Zoom line, so this will be recorded and onto the YouTube channel. So hopefully connect with us in the office with what your takeaway was or what you would like to learn more about if you feel like you have questions on what we did today or you want to take it to the next level. So thanks for joining us tonight on Tuesday. We will see you in the office soon. Just a heads up for those tuning in and reminding them that we have a couple seminar events happening. So next week, the Wednesday the 17th, we are just here in the morning. The afternoon appointments need rescheduled, and Thursday the 18th, we are out traveling to a seminar in Pennsylvania to best support you and your care by learning more from the best. So we will have a short week next week and be back in full time that morning of the 22nd. So make sure you get your appointments changed if need be, and we'll see you in the office soon. Bye.